Millionaire husband demands divorce and the house, telling wife, "You can't afford a lawyer to fight me." She built a multi-million-dollar empire while spending passionate nights with the man she loved, only to discover he had stolen everything while she slept beside him. When he smugly declared, "You can't afford to fight me," he made one fatal mistake. He had no idea what was about to hit him, and what happened next would change everything forever. Hi, my beautiful, loyal, great, and loving family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's Stories. Heavenly Father, bless this beautiful family of story listeners. You know each person and their heart's needs. Guide their lives with your love and grant them peace. Watch over their families and fill their future with hope and joy. Surround them with love and respect in all their relationships. Help them show kindness to one another. Heal those facing illness with your tender mercy. Be their strength and comfort in all problems and challenges. Bless this storytelling community with joy, encouragement, and deep love for one another. May these stories touch hearts and bring people together in respect and understanding. Fill their lives with your abundant love. In your holy name we pray, Amen. If your heart is true, write present. If your love is real, write I am with Mr. Peter. Together, we are not just viewers and storyteller. We are one family, forever. Love arrived on a Tuesday night when the world had forgotten mercy, wrapped in the scent of instant noodles and desperation. The university library stood as a cathedral of broken dreams, its fluorescent lights casting harsh judgment over scattered textbooks and empty coffee cups. Most students had surrendered to exhaustion, retreating to warm beds and full refrigerators. But David Smith remained hunched over his economics textbook like a monk in prayer. His stomach growled a familiar symphony of hunger, the soundtrack of a life lived on borrowed time and borrowed hope. The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows with relentless persistence, each droplet carrying the weight of unspoken sorrows. David's worn jacket hung over the back of his chair, still damp from his hurried journey across campus, pocket change jingling with the hollow sound of insufficient funds. His textbook lay open to a chapter on market equilibrium that might as well have been written in ancient Sanskrit, for all the comprehension it offered his exhausted mind. "Excuse me," a voice like honey over velvet interrupted his mathematical misery. "Is this seat taken?" David raised his weary eyes to discover an angel disguised as a struggling student. Chiaka Washington possessed the kind of natural elegance that designer clothes could never manufacture. Her worn jeans and faded sweater transformed into haute couture by the grace of her presence. Intelligence sparkled in her dark eyes like stars reflected in midnight water, and her smile carried the warmth of a mother's embrace. Even in the harsh library lighting, her skin seemed to glow with an inner radiance that made the world around her appear brighter, more hopeful, more alive with possibility. "Please sit," David stammered, hastily gathering his scattered papers with trembling hands. The proximity of her beauty made his carefully constructed composure crumble like ancient parchment. "I'm David." "Chiaka Washington," she replied, settling into the plastic chair with the fluid grace of a dancer. Her voice carried musical undertones that made his name sound like poetry, each syllable wrapped in warmth that seemed to chase away the chill of his lonely existence. "Legal studies and business administration double major. You?" "Business," David confessed, his voice thick with self-doubt. "Though I'm beginning to question whether I possess the intelligence for such ambitious pursuits." Chiaka's eyes swept over his open textbook with the precision of a master craftsman examining raw materials. A gentle frown creased her brow as she absorbed the chaos of his notes. Desperate scribbles in the margins, highlighted passages that showed more panic than comprehension, calculations that led nowhere but frustration. "Market analysis. That happens to be my favorite subject. Would you mind terribly if I took a closer look?" For the next precious hour, David watched in speechless amazement as Chiaka transformed his academic nightmare into a comprehensible masterpiece. Her mind operated like a Swiss timepiece, dismantling complex economic theories with surgical precision and reconstructing them into digestible wisdom. She explained market dynamics with the passion of a poet describing a sunset, her hands dancing through the air as she painted pictures with words that made abstract concepts bloom into vivid reality. "Supply and demand aren't just curves on a graph," she murmured, sketching elegant diagrams on his notebook margins. "They're the heartbeat of every human desire, the rhythm of every dream that seeks fulfillment in the marketplace of life." "You're absolutely extraordinary," David breathed, his voice heavy with genuine reverence. "How do you make something so impossibly complex appear effortless?" A rose-colored blush bloomed across Chiaka's cheeks, like dawn breaking over a mountain lake. "My mother always insisted that knowledge represents the ultimate power. She impressed that truth upon me before I could even properly hold a pencil." "Please tell me about this remarkable woman." David leaned closer, drawn by an invisible force stronger than gravity. "She's a warrior disguised as a gentle soul." Chiaka's voice softened with infinite affection, her eyes growing distant as memories painted themselves across her features. "She raised me as a single mother, working night shifts cleaning corporate offices to purchase my textbooks. I would fall asleep to the sound of her footsteps in the hallway, returning home at dawn with hands raw from industrial cleaners and a heart still full of dreams for my future. Every evening when she returned home, exhausted to her bones, she would sit beside my bed and whisper the same sacred words. Chiaka, my precious daughter. Love is the most beautiful force in this universe, but knowledge serves as your armor. Never enter any battle carrying love alone." David reached across the table, his fingers finding hers with the inevitability of rivers flowing toward the ocean. Her skin felt like silk beneath his calloused hands, warm and real and somehow perfect in its gentle strength. "She sounds like extraordinary wisdom runs in your family." "She sacrificed everything so I could attend university," Chiaka continued, her thumb tracing gentle circles on his palm. "She insisted I enroll in legal courses alongside my business studies, even though it meant working double shifts to afford the additional tuition. She would say, 'My darling girl, you never know when circumstances will require you to defend yourself. Let the law become your hidden sword, sharp and ready when the world shows its cruel face.'" Their eyes met across the table, and time suspended itself like a held breath. In that frozen moment, surrounded by the detritus of academic struggle, two souls recognized their missing pieces in each other. The harsh fluorescent lighting transformed into candlelight. The uncomfortable plastic chairs became a royal throne, and the empty library evolved into their private kingdom where anything seemed possible. "I should probably head back to my apartment," David whispered, though his body refused to move. "I have class early tomorrow." "Where do you live?" Chiaka asked, her voice barely audible above the humming lights. "The broken-down complex near campus. 3rd floor, apartment 3B. The elevator hasn't worked since the dawn of time, and the heating system exists purely for decoration." David laughed, embarrassed by his circumstances, yet somehow unashamed in her presence. "Not exactly palace living." "I'm in Building C, apartment 2A. Chiaka smiled, her expression suggesting that palaces were built not from marble and gold, but from the connections between kindred spirits. "Perhaps we're neighbors in more ways than one." They gathered their books with reluctant movements, neither wanting to break the magical spell that had woven itself around them. As they walked through the empty corridors together, their shoulders brushing with each step, David felt his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird, desperate for freedom. At the library entrance, beneath the pale glow of the security lights, Chiaka turned to face him completely. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming with promise. "David, would you consider studying together tomorrow evening? I promise to bring something more substantial than the stale vending machine offerings. I'd be honored, David replied, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't name but recognized as the first stirring of something that might reshape his entire existence. She rose on her tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, her lips leaving an invisible brand that would burn sweetly for days. Until tomorrow, then. David watched her disappear into the darkness, her figure growing smaller until she became one with the shadows. He stood there long after she vanished, his hand pressed to his cheek where her kiss lingered like a sacred blessing, breathing in the night air that still carried traces of her subtle perfume. That night, alone in his cramped apartment with its peeling wallpaper and dripping faucet, David replayed every word of their conversation. He could still smell her subtle perfume, still feel the electricity that sparked when their hands touched, still hear the music in her laughter. Sleep remained elusive as his mind painted pictures of tomorrow, of studying beside her, of perhaps stealing another precious moment of her time, of discovering whether this miraculous encounter might bloom into something that could transform his lonely existence into a life worth living. The next evening arrived with agonizing slowness. David paced his tiny apartment, straightening books that didn't need straightening, showering twice, changing his shirt 3 times before settling on his least wrinkled option. When the soft knock finally came at his door, his heart nearly stopped entirely. Chiaka stood in his doorway like a vision, carrying a paper bag that smelled of heaven and a thermos that promised warmth in a world grown suddenly brighter. "I brought real food," she announced with a triumphant smile. "Homemade sandwiches and actual fruit, my mother's secret weapons against starvation." They spread their feast on his tiny kitchen table, the simple meal transformed into a banquet by her presence. As they shared the food, they shared pieces of their souls, dreams whispered over peanut butter sandwiches, fears confessed between bites of apple, hopes painted in the air with their words like prayers offered to benevolent gods. "One day," Chiaka said, holding up half a sandwich like a chalice, "we'll dine at the finest restaurants in the city. Tonight, though, this humble meal represents our feast of kings." "If I have you beside me," David replied, his eyes never leaving her face, "I don't need the entire sandwich. Your presence alone serves as my greatest luxury." Chapter 2. The Spark of Genius. Lightning strikes only once, but when it illuminated Chiaka's mind that autumn evening, it changed the trajectory of 2 lives forever. The library had become their sacred sanctuary, a temple where love and learning intertwined like dancers in perfect harmony. Surrounded by towers of borrowed books and the gentle hum of academic ambition, Chiaka sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, her laptop balanced precariously on a stack of business journals. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulder as she leaned forward, completely absorbed in something that had captured her brilliant mind. David watched from across their makeshift study corner, mesmerized by the intensity radiating from her like heat from a furnace. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with purpose, pausing occasionally as her eyes widened with revelation. She would scribble frantically on napkins, draw diagrams in the margins of notebooks, her excitement building like a symphony crescendo. "David," she whispered urgently, her voice trembling with discovery, "come here, look at this." He crawled across the carpet, settling beside her close enough to feel the electricity of her inspiration. Her laptop screen displayed columns of numbers, market research data, and what appeared to be preliminary business calculations scattered across multiple browser tabs. "What am I looking at?" David asked softly, though he could sense he was witnessing something monumental. Chiaka's eyes blazed with the fire of a visionary as she pointed to her hastily drawn sketches. "I've been analyzing the inefficiencies in supply chain management across mid-sized manufacturing companies. Look at these numbers, David. Companies are hemorrhaging money because they can't track inventory properly. can't predict demand accurately, can't optimize their logistics. She grabbed a fresh napkin and began drawing boxes connected by arrows, her movements quick and precise. But what if we created a platform that could integrate all these functions? Artificial intelligence to predict demand patterns, real-time inventory tracking, automated supplier communications, predictive analytics for maintenance schedules. David stared at the crude diagram, trying to comprehend the magnitude of her vision. The concepts swirled in his mind like foreign languages, beautiful but incomprehensible. I don't understand half of what you're describing, but the way your eyes illuminate when you explain it makes me believe you've discovered gold. Better than gold, Chiaka breathed, her voice filled with wonder. This could revolutionize how businesses operate. We could cut operational costs by 30%, reduce waste by 40%, increase efficiency exponentially. Companies would pay substantial fees for this kind of optimization. She turned to face him completely, her hands gripping his shoulders with desperate intensity. David, this could be our ticket out of poverty. This could be our future. He studied her face, watching passion transform her features into something ethereal and magnificent. Though the technical aspects remained beyond his grasp, her conviction became his conviction, her dream became his dream. If you believe in it, then I believe in it completely. You're the genius here, Chiaka. I'm just grateful to witness your brilliance. Over the following weeks, their tiny apartment transformed into mission control for Chiaka's revolutionary concept. She worked with the relentless determination of a woman possessed, sketching business models on every available surface, conducting market research until dawn, refining her vision with meticulous precision. David became her devoted apprentice, eager to absorb whatever knowledge she was willing to share. "Sit beside me," Chiaka instructed one evening, patting the threadbare couch cushion. "Tonight you learn about contract negotiations." David settled next to her, close enough to breathe in her subtle perfume, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. She opened a thick legal textbook to a chapter marked with dozens of colorful sticky notes. "Every business relationship begins with a contract," she explained, her finger tracing the dense paragraphs. "But most people treat contracts like formalities, boring documents to be signed quickly and forgotten. That's a catastrophic mistake." She pulled out a stack of sample contracts she had collected from various sources, spreading them across their coffee table like tarot cards revealing the future. "Look at this termination clause," she pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. "See how vague the language is. That ambiguity could cost someone their entire business if circumstances turn sour." David leaned closer, trying to decipher the legal jargon that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. "How do you make sense of all this?" "Practice and paranoia," Chiaka laughed, her fingers intertwining with his. "My mother's voice constantly whispers in my ear, trust, but verify, love, but protect yourself. Every word in a contract has power, David. Every comma can shift the balance of a relationship." She opened her laptop and pulled up a document she had been working on. "This is our future partnership agreement template. Read through it carefully." David studied the screen, squinting at the precisely crafted language. Chiaka had anticipated every possible scenario, every potential conflict, every avenue for protection. Her legal training merged seamlessly with her business acumen, creating documents that were both comprehensive and understandable. "You've thought of everything," he marveled, scrolling through pages of meticulously organized clauses. "Not everything," she admitted, saving the document. "But I've tried to imagine every way someone could betray or deceive us. Knowledge is protection, David. The more we understand about contracts, negotiations, and business law, the stronger our foundation becomes." Night after night, she became his teacher in the university of their shared dreams. She taught him how to read financial statements, how to identify red flags in investor agreements, how to structure presentations that would capture the attention of potential clients. David absorbed every lesson with the devotion of a disciple learning sacred scriptures. "Repeat after me," Chiaka said during one late-night session, her voice taking on the authoritative tone of a master instructor. "Never accept the first offer." "Never accept the first offer," David recited obediently. "Always negotiate from a position of strength. Always negotiate from a position of strength. Never sign anything without reading it completely. Never sign anything without reading it completely. And most importantly," she leaned forward, her eyes boring into his with laser intensity, "never trust anyone so completely that you stop protecting yourself." David hesitated at this final lesson, something cold settling in his stomach. Even in love? Chiaka's expression softened, and she reached up to caress his cheek with infinite tenderness. "Especially in love, my darling. Love makes us vulnerable. Love makes us want to trust blindly. But smart love knows that protection and passion can coexist." As autumn melted into winter, their relationship deepened alongside their business partnership. David marveled at how Chiaka could seamlessly transition from brilliant strategist to passionate lover, from demanding teacher to gentle companion. She was transforming him from a struggling student into a confident entrepreneur, though they both understood that her mind remained the true source of their potential success. "I don't deserve you," David whispered one evening as they lay entwined on their narrow bed, the business plans scattered around them like fallen leaves. "Deserve has nothing to do with love," Chiaka murmured against his chest, her breath warm on his skin. "But deserve has everything to do with success. We're going to earn every bit of our future prosperity." "You're my compass," David said softly, his fingers threading through her hair. "I'll follow wherever you lead." Chiaka lifted her head to look at him, her eyes reflecting the soft lamplight. "We're partners, David. True partners. Your support gives me strength. Your faith gives me courage. Together, we're going to build something extraordinary." Outside their window, snow began to fall like blessings from heaven, each flake unique and perfect. Inside their humble apartment, two hearts beat in synchronization while one brilliant mind continued planning their escape from poverty and into a future bright with unlimited possibility. Chapter 3. Rise to Glory. Success tastes like champagne and feels like silk, but it demands a price paid in sleepless nights and souls offered as collateral to fate. The journey from conception to achievement stretched before them like an endless desert, beautiful and merciless in equal measure. Chiaka's revolutionary platform existed first as lines of code written in their cramped apartment, illuminated by the ghostly glow of computer screens and fueled by determination stronger than steel. David watched his brilliant wife transform from visionary to architect to general, commanding their small army of freelance programmers with the precision of a master conductor directing a symphony. Their bank account dwindled to terrifying numbers as they poured every dollar into development costs. Ramen noodles became gourmet cuisine, and their worn sofa transformed into a conference room where Chiaka rehearsed presentations with the intensity of a Broadway actress preparing for opening night. Sleep became a luxury they couldn't afford, sacrificed on the altar of ambition. The stress carved shadows beneath Chiaka's eyes, but her spirit blazed brighter with each passing challenge. David would find her at 3 a.m, fingers dancing across her keyboard like a pianist performing a concerto, her mind orchestrating solutions to problems that would have defeated lesser intellects. In those quiet moments, watching her work by lamplight, he felt privileged to witness genius in its purest form. "We have exactly enough money for 2 more weeks, David announced one morning, staring at their online banking with hollow eyes. "After that, we'll need to find regular jobs or move back in with our families." Chiaka looked up from her laptop where she had been fine-tuning their sales pitch for the 1,000th time. Her face showed the strain of months spent walking the tightrope between dreams and disaster, but her eyes still burned with undiminished fire. The morning light caught the golden threads in her hair, transforming her into something ethereal, despite her exhaustion. "Then we make these 2 weeks count," she declared with quiet ferocity. "Tomorrow we pitch to Henderson Manufacturing. They're our perfect target client, mid-sized, established, drowning in inefficiency. If they don't see the value in our solution, no one will." She rose from their makeshift desk and moved to the window overlooking the city that would soon be theirs to conquer. "David, do you trust me completely?" "With my life," he replied without hesitation, moving to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist as they gazed out at their future kingdom. "Then believe in us one more time. Believe that tomorrow changes everything." The Henderson presentation arrived like Judgment Day wrapped in corporate politeness. Chiaka wore her best dress, a simple black number that somehow looked elegant, despite being purchased from a discount rack. She had styled her hair in a sophisticated updo that framed her face like a work of art, transforming necessity into elegance through sheer force of personality. David donned his only suit, grateful that his nervous sweating didn't show through the dark fabric. The boardroom intimidated with its mahogany table and leather chairs that cost more than their monthly rent. 5 executives in tailored suits examined Chiaka and David with the detached interest of scientists studying laboratory specimens. The company's CEO, Richard Henderson, leaned back in his chair with arms crossed, his expression suggesting he had already mentally dismissed them before they spoke their first word. "You have 30 minutes, Henderson announced, glancing at his expensive watch. "Impress me." Chiaka rose with the grace of a queen ascending her throne. When she began speaking, magic filled the room. She painted pictures with statistics, told stories with profit margins, wove dreams from operational improvements. Her voice carried the conviction of absolute truth as she demonstrated how their platform could transform Henderson Manufacturing from struggling competitor to industry leader. Every gesture was calculated, every pause strategic, every word chosen to maximum effect. David watched in awe as the executives leaned forward, their skepticism melting under the heat of Chiaka's passion. She answered every question with surgical precision, countered every objection with irrefutable logic, transformed doubt into desire with the skill of a master alchemist. "Your current supply chain inefficiencies create bottlenecks that cost you approximately $47,000 per week," she stated with mathematical certainty, her fingers dancing across her laptop to display real-time projections. "Our platform eliminates these bottlenecks while optimizing inventory turnover by 38%. "The numbers don't lie," Chiaka concluded, her hands steady as she closed her laptop. "Your current inefficiencies are costing you approximately $2 million annually. Our platform will eliminate 60% of that waste within 6 months. The return on investment becomes undeniable." Silence stretched across the boardroom like a held breath. Henderson exchanged glances with his colleagues, some invisible communication passing between them. Finally, he leaned forward and smiled for the first time since their arrival. "When can you start?" The contract signing felt like a religious ceremony. Henderson Manufacturing agreed to pay them $500,000 for the first installation, with additional payments tied to performance improvements. As Chiaka signed their names to the agreement, her hands trembled with relief, so profound it bordered on euphoria. That evening, in their tiny apartment that suddenly felt like a palace, they celebrated with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of champagne David had been saving for this exact moment. Chiaka laughed until tears streamed down her cheeks, the accumulated stress of months finally releasing like pressure from a valve. "We did it," she whispered against David's chest as they swayed together in their narrow kitchen. "We actually did it." "You did it," David corrected, his voice thick with emotion. I just followed your lead. We did it together, she insisted, pulling back to look into his eyes with fierce intensity. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every sacrifice, we carried each other through it all. The Henderson success opened floodgates they hadn't dared imagine. Word spread through manufacturing circles about the miraculous platform that could transform struggling companies into profit-generating machines. Clients lined up like pilgrims seeking salvation, each contract larger than the last. Within 6 months, their client roster included names that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. Within 18 months, their company had grown from a 2-person operation run from their apartment to a legitimate corporation employing 30 people in a downtown office building. David had transformed from supportive boyfriend to charismatic CEO, though everyone who worked closely with them understood that Chiaka remained the true strategic genius behind their success. The Forbes interview wants to feature us next month, David announced, walking into Chiaka's office with the confidence of a man who had grown comfortable with success. His tailored suits and expensive haircuts reflected their new status, though his smile remained genuine when he looked at his wife. Both of us, Chiaka asked, glancing up from the financial projections scattered across her desk. Of course, both of us, David replied, settling into the leather chair across from her. We're partners in everything. Always have been, always will be. Their financial advisor had been encouraging them to diversify their wealth, to purchase real estate as both investment and symbol of their achievements. When they toured the mansion in the exclusive Riverside Hills neighborhood, Chiaka fell in love instantly. The house commanded 3 acres of manicured grounds, featuring a circular driveway, marble foyer, and windows that framed the city like living paintings. The master suite alone was larger than their first apartment, with a marble fireplace and a balcony that offered panoramic views of the skyline they had conquered. Chiaka stood on that balcony, wind lifting her hair like a crown, and David knew he was witnessing a queen claiming her rightful throne. "It's perfect," she breathed, standing in the master bedroom that overlooked their future kingdom. "Can you imagine living here?" "I can imagine growing old with you here," David replied, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "This will be our palace of love, our sanctuary from the world." The purchase negotiations proceeded smoothly until the paperwork reached the final stages. The real estate agent suggested putting the deed in David's name alone, citing some vague tax advantages and simplified legal procedures. David nodded along, prepared to sign wherever indicated. "Stop," Chiaka interrupted firmly. "Both names go on the deed, 50-50 ownership, no exceptions." David looked surprised. "Does it really matter? We're married. What's mine is yours anyway." "It matters to me," Chiaka insisted with gentle determination. "This house represents everything we've built together. Our names belong together on every document that defines our life." The agent quickly amended the paperwork, and soon both their signatures graced the deed to their dream home. As they walked through the empty rooms before the furniture arrived, Chiaka touched the walls as though they were sacred relics. "Every stone, every beam, every window, this is us," she whispered with reverence. "This house will witness our entire future. Our children will run through these hallways. Our grandchildren will play in this garden. This is where our love story will unfold for the rest of our lives." David kissed her deeply in the foyer, their voices echoing off the marble floors. "Forever ours," he promised. "Nothing will ever separate us from this place or from each other." They celebrated their first night in the mansion by making love in every room, christening their palace with passion and laughter. In the master bedroom, with moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chiaka traced patterns on David's chest with her fingertips. "Do you remember when we shared that half sandwich in the library?" she whispered. You said one day we'd dine at the finest restaurants, David replied, stroking her hair. Now we can dine anywhere we choose, she murmured, but nothing will ever taste as sweet as that first meal we shared together. Chiaka had never felt more secure, more protected, more certain that their love had built foundations strong enough to withstand any storm. Standing on their bedroom balcony, as dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, she watched David sleep peacefully in their king-sized bed. Their company thrived, their home provided sanctuary, their love seemed unbreakable. She had no way of knowing that the very trust that made their success possible would soon become the weapon used to destroy everything they had built together. Chapter 4. The Perfect Trap. Trust becomes a double-edged sword when wielded by those who have learned to disguise betrayal as love. The morning arrived draped in deceptive serenity, with golden sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their mansion's breakfast room. Chiaka sat curled in her favorite silk robe, steam rising from her coffee cup like incense as she reviewed the quarterly financial reports. Their company had exceeded every projection. Their client base had expanded beyond their most optimistic dreams, and their future stretched ahead bright with infinite possibility. David entered the room carrying his briefcase and an unusually thick stack of documents, his expression serious in a way that immediately captured Chiaka's attention. His tailored suit spoke of success and authority, but something in his demeanor suggested underlying tension. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead with practiced affection. "I hope you slept well, because we have some important business matters to discuss today." Chiaka set down her coffee, studying his face for clues to his unusual formality. "What kind of business matters?" "The quarterly reports look fantastic, and our client retention rates are unprecedented." David settled into the chair across from her, spreading the documents across the mahogany table with deliberate precision. "That's exactly the problem, if we can call success a problem. We've grown so rapidly that we're attracting serious attention from major investors. Blackstone Capital wants to inject $50 million into our company." "50 million?" Chiaka's eyes widened with astonishment. "David, that's incredible news. Why do you look like someone died?" "Because major investments come with major complications," David replied, his fingers drumming against the table. "Blackstone requires significant restructuring of our corporate framework before they'll commit that kind of capital. Legal reorganization, shareholder agreements, board restructuring, the whole process is incredibly complex." He pushed the stack of documents toward her, their white pages seeming to glow in the morning light. "I've spent the last week working with our corporate attorney to prepare all the necessary paperwork. We need to move quickly if we want to secure this funding. Blackstone gave us a 72-hour window to complete the restructuring." Chiaka lifted the first document, her eyes scanning the dense legal language that filled every line. Share transfer agreement, director resignation, board resolution. Each page bristled with official seals and signature lines marked with colorful sticky notes. "This seems rather overwhelming," she murmured, flipping through pages that might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics. "Perhaps we should schedule a meeting with the attorney so he can explain everything in detail." "I already spoke with him extensively," David assured her, his voice smooth as silk. "Harrison Mitchell, you remember him. He's handled all our corporate legal work since we incorporated. He confirmed that everything here represents standard procedure for this type of investment restructuring." Chiaka frowned, trying to process the implications of the paperwork before her. "But why does it feel so rushed? Shouldn't major decisions like this require more careful consideration?" "The investor market moves at lightning speed," David explained patiently. "Blackstone has 12 other companies competing for their attention. If we don't move immediately, they'll take their $50 million elsewhere. This opportunity won't come around again." The pressure of the timeline made Chiaka's head spin. She had built their company on careful analysis and methodical planning, but now David was asking her to make decisions that could reshape their entire future within a matter of hours. The documents seemed to multiply before her eyes, each page demanding her attention while the clock ticked away their opportunity. "Walk me through the most important sections," she requested, gesturing toward the intimidating stack. David moved to sit beside her, his familiar cologne providing comfort in the midst of confusion. "This first document transfers all current shares into a more structured format that meets Blackstone's requirements. The second establishes new director roles to accommodate their investment representatives. The third creates board resolutions that streamline decision-making processes." His explanations sounded reasonable, delivered in the confident tone she had grown to trust completely. He spoke with the authority of someone who had thoroughly researched every angle, considered every implication, consulted every expert. "I know this feels overwhelming," David continued, his hand finding hers with gentle reassurance. "But remember, we're partners in everything. I would never ask you to sign anything that wasn't in our best interests. You trust me, don't you?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge and a caress. Of course she trusted him. He was her husband, her business partner, her closest confidant. They had built everything together through mutual support and unwavering faith in each other. Doubt felt like betrayal of their deepest bond. "Always," Chiaka replied softly, her thumb tracing circles on his palm. "I trust you with my life." David smiled with what appeared to be relief and gratitude. "Then let's secure our future together. Sign where I've marked, and by tonight we'll be $50 million closer to building the empire we've always dreamed of." Chiaka picked up the elegant fountain pen David offered, its weight substantial in her fingers. Page by page, she signed her name with the flowing script she had perfected over countless contracts and agreements. Each signature felt like an affirmation of their partnership, a renewal of their mutual commitment to shared success. David watched intently as she worked through the documents, occasionally pointing to overlooked signature lines or providing brief clarifications about specific clauses. His attention to detail impressed her, confirming that he had indeed studied every aspect of the restructuring thoroughly. "There," Chiaka announced, setting down the pen after signing the final page. $50 million awaits. David gathered the completed documents with obvious satisfaction, organizing them into neat stacks before returning them to his briefcase. "Harrison will file everything with the appropriate agencies today. The transition should be seamless." Over the following weeks, Chiaka noticed subtle shifts in the company's operational dynamics. Her email access began experiencing periodic technical difficulties. Meetings she had initiated were rescheduled without her input. Administrative staff seemed confused about her current role and responsibilities. "There seems to be some confusion about my access credentials," she mentioned to David during one of their evening conversations. "The IT department claims they never received authorization to maintain my administrative privileges." "Probably just bureaucratic delays related to the restructuring," David replied dismissively. "These investor-driven changes always create temporary disruptions. Everything will normalize once the new systems are fully implemented." His explanations satisfied her concerns, as they always did. David had never given her reason to question his judgment or doubt his commitment to their partnership. If he seemed unconcerned about the administrative irregularities, she trusted that his perspective was informed and accurate. The company lawyer, Harrison Mitchell, sent periodic updates about the restructuring progress, all addressed exclusively to David's business email account. Corporate notifications, shareholder communications, and regulatory filings flowed to David's office rather than their shared home address. When Chiaka asked about the communications, David assured her that he was managing all investor-related correspondence to avoid overwhelming her with unnecessary paperwork. "You've carried the strategic burden for so long," he said with apparent concern for her well-being. "Let me handle the administrative complexities while you focus on what you do best, developing new innovations and maintaining client relationships." His consideration touched her deeply. After countless months of intense pressure and responsibility, the opportunity to step back from administrative duties felt like a generous gift. She embraced the chance to concentrate on creative projects, while David managed the business operations with his newly developed expertise. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Chiaka's direct involvement in daily operations diminished. Her office keycard stopped working. Her signature was removed from bank accounts pending security updates. Her name disappeared from corporate directories and investor presentations. Each change was explained as temporary, necessary, or beneficial, and her trust in David made her acceptance automatic. The trap had been constructed with masterful precision, disguised as love and presented as partnership. By the time Chiaka realized the true nature of the documents she had signed, the transformation was complete. Everything they had built together now belonged exclusively to David Smith, while she remained in their beautiful mansion, unaware that she had voluntarily signed away her entire life's work. Chapter 5. The Slow Poison. Love dies not with dramatic explosions, but with gentle suffocations, each breath of trust becoming thinner until only the illusion of life remains. The isolation crept into Chiaka's world like fog rolling across still water, so gradual, so subtle, that she barely noticed until the mist had become a wall. Her days in their magnificent mansion grew longer and quieter, filled with increasingly hollow conversations and carefully constructed reassurances from David. Each morning he left for the office with promises of brief meetings that stretched into 12-hour absences. Each evening he returned with explanations that sounded reasonable but felt incomplete. "You look tired, my darling," David would say, settling beside her on their imported Italian leather sofa, his voice dripping with manufactured concern. "All those years of carrying our business on your shoulders have taken their toll. You deserve to rest now, to enjoy the fruits of your incredible labor." Chiaka studied his face in the soft lamplight, searching for traces of the devoted partner who had once called her his compass. His features remained familiar, the strong jawline she had kissed countless times, the brown eyes that had once reflected her own dreams back to her. But something essential had shifted, like looking at a photograph that had been subtly altered. "I don't feel tired," she replied carefully. "I feel disconnected. The business was my life's work, David. Asking me to step away feels like asking me to stop breathing." David reached for her hands with practiced tenderness, his thumbs stroking her palms in the gesture that had once sent electricity through her entire body. "The company is thriving beyond our wildest dreams precisely because you built such strong foundations. Now it's my turn to carry the burden, to protect what you created while you rediscover parts of yourself that got lost in the struggle." His words wrapped around her like silk scarves, beautiful and suffocating simultaneously. When he spoke with such apparent devotion, doubt felt like betrayal of their deepest bonds. Yet something cold had taken residence in her chest, whispering warnings she couldn't quite articulate. "Perhaps I could work from home," she suggested. "Handle some projects remotely, maintain connections with our key clients." "The stress would consume you again," David insisted, his voice taking on an edge of frustration before immediately softening. "I've watched you sacrifice your health, your happiness, your peace of mind for this business. I won't stand by while you destroy yourself for profit margins and client meetings." He pulled her closer, his lips finding her forehead in a kiss that felt more like a benediction than affection. "Trust me to protect what we've built. Trust me to protect you." The conversations followed the same pattern night after night. Chiaka expressing concerns, David providing explanations that sounded logical, but left her feeling more isolated than before. He had become masterful at deflecting her questions with demonstrations of concern, transforming her legitimate business inquiries into evidence of unhealthy obsession. Meanwhile, David's transformation accelerated with each passing day. The uncertain young man who had once struggled with basic economic concepts had evolved into a commanding presence who dominated boardrooms with apparent natural authority. Industry publications featured him on their covers. Business schools invited him to deliver keynote addresses. Competitors studied his strategies with grudging admiration. What they didn't realize, what no one realized except David himself, was that every innovative approach, every brilliant strategy, every revolutionary concept had originated from Chiaka's extraordinary mind. He had simply learned to present her ideas as his own discoveries, her insights as his natural genius. The corporate headquarters buzzed with energy and ambition, David's corner office serving as the nerve center for an empire built on borrowed brilliance. It was there, during a late afternoon meeting with potential investors, that Misha Hancock first entered his orbit like a comet blazing across a dark sky. Misha possessed the kind of polished beauty that seemed designed by committee. Platinum blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, emerald eyes that sparkled with intelligence and ambition, curves that filled her designer business suits with devastating effectiveness. She represented Hartwell and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious marketing firms, and had come to discuss expanding their company's brand presence. "Mr. Smith," she said, extending a manicured hand that felt like porcelain in his grip. "I've been following your company's meteoric rise with absolute fascination. Your innovative approaches to supply chain optimization have revolutionized an entire industry." David felt something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way she looked at him, with genuine admiration, with recognition of his supposed genius, with the kind of respect he had craved since discovering his taste for power. "Please, call me David," he replied, holding her hand longer than professionalism required. "I'm always interested in discussing vision with someone who understands the complexities of building something extraordinary from nothing." Their initial meeting stretched from the scheduled 30 minutes to nearly 2 hours, their conversation flowing with an ease that surprised them both. Misha asked probing questions about his business philosophy, his long-term strategic goals, his inspiration for the revolutionary platforms that had made him an industry legend. David found himself crafting elaborate stories about his journey from struggling student to successful entrepreneur, carefully omitting any mention of Chiaka's foundational role in creating their empire. In his revised narrative, he became the sole architect of their success, the brilliant mind who had recognized market inefficiencies and developed innovative solutions through pure intellectual prowess. "Truly remarkable," Misha breathed, her eyes wide with what appeared to be genuine awe. "Most people with your level of success become arrogant or detached, but you've maintained such authentic passion for your work." The praise intoxicated David more effectively than the finest wine. For years he had lived in Chiaka's intellectual shadow, serving as the face of brilliance he hadn't created, the voice speaking words he hadn't written. Now, finally, someone saw him as the genius he had always wished to be. Their professional relationship evolved with dangerous inevitability. Misha's marketing proposals provided convenient excuses for extended private meetings, working dinners that stretched late into the evening, weekend strategy sessions that had little to do with advertising campaigns. She hung on his every word, treated his recycled insights as revolutionary wisdom, made him feel like the intellectual titan he had always longed to become. "Your wife must be incredibly proud," Misha mentioned during one of their evening consultations, her tone carefully neutral despite the curiosity burning in her eyes. "Chiaka prefers to stay out of the business world now," David replied with practiced smoothness. "She's focused on personal interests, enjoying the security that our success has provided. We maintain very separate professional lives." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't exactly the truth either. Like so many of his statements lately, it existed in the grey area between deception and reality, convenient half-truths that served his evolving narrative. At home, David's performance as devoted husband continued with theatrical precision. He would arrive bearing small gifts, flowers, chocolates, jewelry that sparkled but felt hollow, accompanied by elaborate apologies for his increasing absences and decreased attention. "Forgive me for being so consumed by work," he would say, pulling Chiaka into embraces that felt more like duty than desire. "Everything I do for us. Every late night, every weekend meeting, every sacrifice, it's all to secure our future together." Chiaka accepted his explanations because the alternative, acknowledging that the man she loved was becoming a stranger, seemed impossible to bear. She had invested everything in their partnership, believed in their shared destiny with religious faith. Admitting that David was drifting away meant admitting that her entire adult life had been built on foundations that were crumbling beneath her feet. But late at night, when David lay beside her breathing the steady rhythm of peaceful sleep, Chiaka would stare at the ceiling and feel the growing distance between them like a physical ache. The man who had once called her his compass, his inspiration, his missing piece, now treated her like a beautiful artifact from his past, precious but irrelevant to his present ambitions. Chapter 6. The shattering hearts break, not with the sharp crack of glass, but with the slow grinding of stone against stone, until nothing remains but dust and the memory of wholeness. The evening arrived dressed in deceptive normalcy, with autumn colors painting their mansion's windows in shades of gold and crimson. Chiaka had prepared David's favorite dinner, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, and arranged candles throughout their dining room in hopes of recapturing some fragment of the intimacy that had once defined their relationship. She wore the emerald silk dress he had bought her during their first profitable quarter. Her hair, styled in the elegant upswept he had once claimed, made her look like a goddess. Every detail had been carefully orchestrated to recreate the romance that seemed to be slipping through their fingers like water. She had selected his favorite wine, arranged fresh flowers from their garden, even played the jazz music that had provided the soundtrack to their early courtship. The dining room glowed with warmth and possibility, a stage set for the resurrection of their love. David entered through the front door with his briefcase and an expression of cold determination that immediately shattered her carefully constructed atmosphere of romance. He didn't pause to appreciate the candles or acknowledge the care she had invested in their evening together. His eyes swept over the romantic tableau with the detached assessment of someone cataloguing assets rather than recognizing gestures of love. Instead, he walked directly to his study and returned carrying a manila envelope that seemed to radiate menace like a weapon disguised as correspondence. "We need to talk," he announced, his voice carrying none of the warmth she had grown accustomed to over their years together. The man standing before her bore David's face, but spoke with the inflection of a stranger delivering unwelcome news. Chiaka felt her carefully prepared smile falter as ice began forming in her veins. The salmon she had prepared with such care grew cold on its platter. The candles flickered as though sensing the darkness about to descend upon their home. "Of course, darling. Let me just turn off the oven and we can—" "Sit down," David interrupted, gesturing toward their formal dining table with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This conversation won't take long." The dismissive tone, so different from the gentle voice that had once whispered sweet endearments, struck her like a physical blow. She settled into her chair with growing dread, her hands trembling as David placed the manila envelope before her, like evidence in a trial she hadn't realized she was attending. The candlelight that had seemed so romantic moments earlier now cast ominous shadows across his face, transforming his familiar features into something harsh and unrecognizable. "Open it," David commanded, taking the seat across from her with the distance of a judge pronouncing sentence. Chiaka's fingers felt numb as she lifted the envelope's flap and withdrew a stack of official documents. The top page bore the heading, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," in bold, unforgiving letters. Her eyes scanned the legal language that followed, each word landing like a physical blow to her chest. Terms like irreconcilable differences and division of assets swam before her vision as the carefully constructed world she had built around their love crumbled into dust. "Divorce papers," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sudden roaring in her ears. "David, what is this? What's happening?" "What's happening is the end of a marriage that has run its course," he replied, with the dispassionate tone of someone discussing quarterly earnings rather than the destruction of a life partnership. "I want a clean, efficient dissolution with minimal complications." The documents slipped from her nerveless fingers, scattering across the polished table like fallen leaves. "I don't understand. Yesterday you brought me flowers. Last week you talked about planning a vacation together. This morning you kissed me goodbye as though nothing had changed. How can you—" "Yesterday was yesterday," David cut her off with brutal finality. "Today I'm being honest about what this relationship has become. We're not happy, Chiaka. We haven't been genuinely happy for a long time." Tears began streaming down her cheeks, each drop carrying fragments of dreams that were crumbling in real time. The mascara she had applied so carefully for their romantic evening ran in dark rivulets down her face, but vanity seemed irrelevant in the face of such devastating betrayal. "We can fix whatever's wrong," she pleaded, her voice breaking with desperate sincerity. "We can go to counseling, take time away together, remember why we fell in love. Please, David, don't throw away everything we've built together." "Everything we've built?" David's laugh carried no humor, only bitter irony. "Let me clarify something for you, Chiaka. The company belongs to me now. The house belongs to me now. The assets, the investments, the bank accounts, all mine." He leaned forward, his eyes cold as winter sky, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting ever could. "You signed away your claim to everything when you trusted me with those restructuring documents. Every signature you put on those papers transferred ownership directly to me. You can't afford the legal team required to challenge the validity of those agreements." The cruelty of his words struck her like physical blows, each syllable designed to inflict maximum damage. This was the man who had once called her his compass, his inspiration, the love of his life. The same hands that had once tenderly wiped away her tears now gestured dismissively at her pain. The same mouth that had whispered promises of eternal devotion now spoke words intended to destroy her completely. "Money means nothing to me," Chiaka said through her tears, her voice breaking with desperate sincerity. "Love is worth more than money, David. I don't want the house or the company or any material possessions. I only want you. I want us." She rose from her chair and moved around the table toward him, her movements graceful despite her emotional devastation. The silk dress that had once made him breathless with desire now seemed like a costume from a play that had ended without her knowledge. "Remember when we shared instant noodles in that tiny apartment? Remember how we used to dream together about the future we would build? That love was real, David. It was the most real thing either of us had ever experienced." David remained seated, watching her approach with the detached interest of a scientist observing a laboratory specimen. His complete lack of emotional response chilled her more than outright anger would have. There was no recognition in his eyes, no flicker of the man who had once proclaimed her the center of his universe. "I can give up everything material," Chiaka continued, kneeling beside his chair and taking his hands in hers. His skin felt cold, foreign, as though he had become a stranger wearing David's face. "We can start over from nothing if that's what it takes. We did it before. We can do it again. Just please don't abandon what we have together." For a moment, something flickered across David's face. A shadow of recognition, perhaps, or the ghost of feelings that had once burned between them. His fingers twitched almost imperceptibly in her grasp, and hope flared in her chest like a dying flame given sudden oxygen. Chiaka seized on that moment like a drowning woman grabbing for driftwood. She pressed her lips to his in a kiss, filled with all the passion and desperation her breaking heart could muster. For a few precious seconds, he didn't pull away. His mouth remained soft beneath hers, his body warm and familiar despite the coldness of his words. She poured everything into that kiss, every memory of their love, every dream of their future, every prayer that the man she had married still existed somewhere beneath the cruel stranger who had taken his place. When they separated, David was smiling, but it was a hollow expression, empty of affection or remembrance, carrying only the satisfaction of someone who had successfully completed a distasteful task. The smile was worse than anger, worse than cruelty, worse than any harsh words he could have spoken. It revealed the absolute completion of his transformation from loving partner to calculating stranger. "You always were sentimental," he said with patronizing gentleness, his voice carrying the condescending tone one might use with a confused child. "Sign the papers, Chiaka. Don't make this more difficult than necessary." The smile was worse than anger, worse than cruelty, worse than any harsh words he could have spoken. It revealed the absolute completion of his transformation from loving partner to calculating stranger. The man she had fallen in love with no longer existed, replaced by someone who could deliver devastating blows while wearing the mask of kindness. David gathered the divorce papers and returned them to their envelope, his movements efficient and businesslike. "My attorney will contact you about the details. I suggest you find legal representation, though I suspect you'll discover the options are limited given your financial constraints." He paused at the dining room entrance, surveying the romantic scene she had created with what might have been amusement. "You went to considerable trouble this evening. The salmon smells delicious. Perhaps you'll find someone who can appreciate such efforts in the future." He left her kneeling beside his empty chair, surrounded by the ruins of their romantic evening and the ashes of their shared dreams. The candles continued burning, casting dancing shadows on the walls as Chiaka wept with the abandon of someone whose entire world had just collapsed. The carefully prepared dinner grew cold. The wine remained unopened. The jazz music played on as though nothing had changed, as though love had not just been murdered in their dining room. Hours passed before she found the strength to move, to process what had just occurred, to begin grappling with the magnitude of David's betrayal. She climbed the stairs to his study, her legs unsteady, but her purpose crystalline. If he claimed to own everything through documents she had signed, she needed to understand exactly what she had surrendered. The filing cabinet yielded copies of the restructuring papers she had signed months earlier, documents she had trusted him to explain accurately. This time, she read every word with the careful attention of someone whose life depended on comprehension. Share transfer agreement. Director resignation. Board resolution. Each page revealed another layer of her unwitting surrender. Her ownership stake in the company, eliminated. Her position as director, terminated. Her authority over decisions, revoked. Her access to assets, denied. Every signature she had placed on those documents had been another link in the chain of her own imprisonment. David had orchestrated her destruction with masterful precision, using her trust as the weapon to dismantle everything she had created. The woman who had built a multi-million-dollar empire from nothing but vision and determination had been reduced to a powerless spectator to her own downfall. But as Chiaka sat in the darkness of his study, surrounded by evidence of his calculated betrayal, something began stirring in her chest. Not the broken despair that had consumed her moments earlier, but something harder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. Her mother's voice whispered across the years, "Knowledge is your armor, my darling. Never enter battle without both love and protection." She had entered this marriage carrying only love. But she still possessed knowledge, still retained the brilliant mind that had created their empire in the first place. David had stolen her company and claimed her assets, but he had underestimated the most important thing. He had underestimated her. Chapter 7. The awakening warriors are not born from comfort, but forged in the furnace of betrayal, where innocence burns away to reveal the steel that was always hidden beneath. The darkness of David's study embraced Chiaka like a cocoon as she sat surrounded by the evidence of her destruction, the documents that had transformed her from empire builder to dispossessed wife scattered across his mahogany desk. The grandfather clock in the corner counted the hours with relentless precision while she remained motionless, processing the magnitude of David's calculated treachery. Each tick seemed to echo her heartbeat, each chime marking another moment in her transition from victim to something far more dangerous. The leather chair that had once symbolized success now felt like a throne of thorns, but she refused to abandon her post. Around her, the trappings of their shared prosperity mocked her naivety. Expensive artwork they had chosen together, first-edition books she had given him as anniversary gifts. Photographs of happier times when love had seemed stronger than ambition. Dawn crept through the windows like a reluctant witness, casting pale light across the legal papers that had become the instruments of her downfall. Chiaka's tears had dried sometime during the night, replaced by a crystalline clarity that felt both foreign and familiar. The woman who had wept desperately over David's cruel rejection had disappeared in the darkness, leaving behind someone harder, sharper, infinitely more focused. She rose from the leather chair with movements that possessed a new quality, not the graceful elegance of a pampered wife, but the deliberate precision of a predator assessing the battlefield. Her reflection in the window showed a face transformed by revelation, eyes that burned with purpose rather than pain. The silk dress that had been meant to seduce had become battle armor, elegant but functional for the war ahead. "Knowledge is your armor, my precious daughter," her mother's voice whispered across the years, as clear as if the woman stood beside her in that opulent study. "Love is beautiful, but knowledge is protection. Never enter battle without both." The memory struck Chiaka with the force of revelation. Her mother had known this moment would come, had sensed even then that love without protection would leave her daughter vulnerable to the very betrayal that had now occurred. The legal courses she had insisted Chiaka take, the warnings about trusting too completely, the emphasis on building intellectual armor, all of it had been preparation for this exact battle. She moved to the massive bookshelf that dominated one wall of David's study, her fingers trailing along the spines of law books she had purchased for him during their courtship. Corporate law, contract interpretation, shareholder rights, titles that had once seemed like romantic gifts now revealed themselves as weapons she had unknowingly stockpiled for her own defense. Chiaka pulled the restructuring documents toward her and began reading with the trained eye of someone who had spent countless hours studying contract law, corporate governance, and shareholder agreements. This time, she didn't read as a trusting wife accepting her husband's explanations, but as a legal scholar dissecting each clause for weaknesses, loopholes, and potential challenges. The share transfer agreement that had seemed so straightforward in David's office revealed troubling inconsistencies under careful examination. The timing of the signatures didn't align properly with the alleged investor requirements. The independent legal counsel clause had been satisfied by Harrison Mitchell, their company attorney who represented the business, not her personal interests. The consideration sections contained language that could be interpreted as indicating undue influence or duress. "He made mistakes," Chiaka whispered to the silent room, her voice carrying the cold satisfaction of a hunter discovering tracks in the snow. In his arrogance, in his rush to steal everything, he made critical mistakes. She pulled legal textbooks from David's shelves, books she had given him as gifts during the early days of their business, when she had tried to educate him about the intricacies of corporate law. The irony wasn't lost on her that she would now use those same resources to dismantle the trap he had constructed. Each page she turned revealed another avenue of attack, another weakness in his seemingly impenetrable fortress of fraud. Constructive trust, undue influence, unconscionable contract. The legal concepts flooded back to her like water breaking through a dam, her law school training combining with years of practical business experience to create a formidable arsenal of knowledge. David had assumed her trust would render her helpless, but he had forgotten the most important truth about their relationship. She had always been the strategic genius, the architectural mind behind their empire. As the morning progressed, Chiaka's transformation accelerated. She traded her silk dress for comfortable jeans and a sweater, clothing that spoke of work rather than seduction. She tied her hair back in a practical ponytail, clearing her vision for the battles ahead. The woman who had begged for love just hours earlier was evolving into someone who understood that the most devastating victories are won not with tears, but with intelligence. The transformation wasn't immediate. It unfolded over days and weeks like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. Chiaka began each morning in David's study, surrounded by legal texts, corporate filings, and carefully organized evidence. She documented every email exchange, every financial transaction, every business decision that revealed her foundational role in creating their company. Her computer skills, honed through years of building their technological platform, allowed her to recover deleted files and archived communications that David had assumed were lost forever. His corporate email account, still synchronized with their home network, revealed the true extent of his deception. Messages to Misha Hancock spoke of romantic rendezvous disguised as business meetings. Communications with investors described strategies that had originated entirely from Chiaka's innovative mind. The discovery of his correspondence with Misha felt like reopening a wound, but Chiaka forced herself to read every message with clinical detachment. David's words to his mistress revealed a man she barely recognized, boastful, arrogant, completely rewriting the history of their company's creation to cast himself as the sole genius behind their success. She was never really involved in the strategic decisions, David had written to Misha. Chiaka handled some administrative tasks, but the vision, the innovation, the business acumen, that all came from me. The lies were so complete, so perfectly constructed, that Chiaka almost admired their audacity. Almost. But fury burned brighter than admiration, and she carefully copied every message to her growing evidence files. "He thinks I'm defenseless," she murmured, while organizing her growing collection of evidence into carefully labeled folders. "He believes that signing those papers rendered me powerless, helpless, defeated." She paused in her work to study her reflection in the dark computer screen, seeing not the broken wife who had begged for love just weeks earlier, but someone entirely different, someone harder, someone infinitely more dangerous. "He forgot the most fundamental truth about our partnership," she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I was always the mind behind our success. I was the architect who designed our empire. I was the strategist who built our fortune from nothing but vision and determination." Her fingers traced the edge of a law school textbook, its pages marked with highlights and annotations from her student days. The constitutional law course that had once seemed academic now provided practical knowledge about due process and equal protection. Contract law transformed from theory into a weapon for dismantling fraudulent agreements. corporate governance became the key to understanding how David had stolen her life's work. "And I still have my sword." The decision to represent herself crystallized with the force of divine revelation. David expected her to scramble for affordable legal assistance, to accept whatever inadequate representation she could find within her limited budget. He anticipated watching her fumble through proceedings she couldn't understand, defeated by complexity before the battle even began. Instead, she would face him in court as an equal, mind against mind, strategy against strategy, the student who had surpassed her teacher confronting the man who had stolen her throne. The prospect filled her with savage satisfaction, a burning anticipation that consumed her grief and transformed it into fuel for the battle ahead. Chiaka established a war room in the mansion's library, covering the mahogany table with legal briefs, evidence files, and strategic plans. She studied recent case law involving corporate fraud, undue influence, and constructive trust. She researched the judges who might hear her case, learning their backgrounds, their judicial philosophies, their previous rulings in similar matters. Judge Patricia Hartwell had a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense to reach the truth. Judge Morrison Richards showed little patience for wealthy litigants who tried to use their resources to overwhelm opponents. Judge Catherine Mills had written extensively about gender equality and business ownership. Each potential jurist offered different advantages, different risks, different strategic considerations. Her mother would have been proud to see the transformation. The vulnerable young woman who had once needed protection had evolved into a warrior capable of defending herself with devastating effectiveness. The legal knowledge that had seemed like abstract education now became practical weaponry. Every course she had taken, every textbook she had studied, every principle she had learned combining into an arsenal of intellectual destruction. Late one evening, as she worked by lamplight in the library, Chiaka paused to write a letter she would never send, a message to the mother who had prepared her for this moment without either of them knowing it. "Mama," she wrote, "you always told me that knowledge would be my armor. Tonight I understand that you weren't just teaching me to defend myself, you were preparing me to reclaim what was mine. The sword you insisted I sharpen is now ready for battle. Your daughter will not be erased from her own story." David continued his charade of concerned husband during his increasingly rare visits to the mansion, bringing flowers and hollow apologies for his busy schedule. He studied her face for signs of capitulation, searching for evidence that his psychological warfare had achieved its intended effect. What he saw instead was a woman transformed. Chiaka accepted his gifts with polite detachment, responded to his false concern with cordial distance, and discussed their impending divorce with the calm professionalism of someone conducting a business transaction. Her tears had dried, her desperate pleas had ended, her emotional vulnerability had hardened into something resembling marble. "You seem different," David observed during one of his perfunctory visits, his tone carrying the first hint of uncertainty she had heard from him since that terrible evening with the divorce papers. "I am different," Chiaka replied simply, not looking up from the legal brief she was reviewing. "Betrayal has a way of clarifying one's priorities and sharpening one's focus." Something flickered across David's face, not concern for her emotional well-being, but calculation about potential complications to his carefully constructed plan. He had expected her to crumble under the weight of his abandonment, to accept defeat with the gracious resignation of someone who understood her powerlessness. Instead, she was preparing for war with the methodical precision of a general marshalling resources for a campaign that would determine the fate of kingdoms. The broken-hearted wife who had knelt beside his chair, begging for love, had disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who understood that the most devastating battles are won not with tears, but with strategy, not with emotion, but with evidence, not with surrender, but with the kind of brilliant, ruthless intelligence that had built empires before and would build them again. Chapter 8. Building the arsenal. Victory belongs not to those who possess the most weapons, but to those who understand precisely how to wield the arsenal they have forged from necessity and sharpened with brilliant determination. The mansion's library had transformed into a command center worthy of the most sophisticated military campaigns, every surface covered with meticulously organized evidence that would serve as ammunition in the battle for justice. Chiaka moved through this controlled chaos with the fluid precision of a master surgeon preparing for the most complex operation of her career, each document she touched representing another weapon in her growing arsenal of legal destruction. The first category of evidence consisted of the original pitch decks that had launched their empire. Pages covered with her distinctive handwriting, margins filled with calculations performed in her hand, concepts sketched in her flowing script. These documents predated David's involvement in the strategic aspects of their business, serving as irrefutable proof that the revolutionary ideas had originated entirely from her brilliant mind. She photographed each page with professional lighting, ensuring every pen stroke was clearly visible, every annotation perfectly legible. The pitch deck for Henderson Manufacturing, their first major client, contained her personal notes about market inefficiencies, her hand-drawn diagrams illustrating the solution, her financial projections that had proven remarkably accurate. David's signature appeared nowhere on these foundational documents, though his name would later claim credit for every innovation they contained. Exhibit A through M, Chiaka murmured, organizing the photographs into digital files with the methodical precision of an archivist preparing materials for posterity. The Genesis documents that prove intellectual ownership beyond any reasonable doubt. The second category proved even more damaging to David's fabricated narrative. Banking records revealed the true source of their company's initial funding, wire transfers from Chiaka's personal savings account, accumulated through her part-time work during college and careful budgeting of her modest family support. Every dollar that had launched their business could be traced directly to her financial sacrifices, not David's non-existent contributions. The earliest business account showed deposits exclusively from her personal funds, her signature on every initial bank document, her contact information listed as the primary account holder. David had been added as a signatory only after their company began generating revenue, his access granted as a convenience rather than recognition of equal ownership. $27,000, she whispered, reviewing the original investment that had grown into their multi-million-dollar empire. Every cent from my accounts, my labor, my sacrifices, he contributed nothing but his willingness to let me carry him to success. Corporate email archives yielded treasure troves of evidence that demolished David's claims of strategic leadership. Messages sent during their company's formative period showed Chiaka developing client relationships, negotiating contract terms, solving technical problems that had threatened to destroy their early progress. Her digital signature appeared on every significant business correspondence, her voice evident in every strategic communication. David's early emails, by contrast, revealed a man struggling to understand basic business concepts, constantly seeking clarification about decisions Chiaka had already made, serving as little more than a messenger, delivering her brilliant strategies to clients and investors. The progression was painfully clear. Chiaka making decisions, David learning to articulate her choices, eventually claiming credit for innovations he had never understood well enough to create independently. The most devastating evidence emerged from the company's employee files. Original hiring documents showed Chiaka conducting interviews, evaluating candidates, making hiring decisions based on strategic needs she had identified. Employment contracts contained her signature as the decision-making authority, her contact information as the primary supervisor, her strategic vision outlined in employee handbooks she had personally written. Christopher Reynolds, one of their first software developers, had maintained copies of his original employment correspondence. His hiring email came directly from Chiaka's account, detailing technical requirements she had specified, salary negotiations she had conducted, reporting structures she had established. David appeared in these early communications only as someone who would handle administrative paperwork after Chiaka made the substantial decisions. "They'll testify," Chiaka said with grim satisfaction, reviewing the list of employees who remembered the true hierarchy of their early company. "Michael knows who designed the original algorithms. Jessica remembers who solved the integration problems that almost killed our first client implementation. Daniel can confirm who developed the quality assurance protocols that became our competitive advantage." Her contact with these early employees revealed universal surprise at David's current public persona as the company's visionary founder. Each conversation reinforced the same truth. Chiaka had been the strategic genius, the technical innovator, the driving force behind every aspect of their success. David had served as her lieutenant, learning from her example, but never contributing original insights that shaped their competitive strategy. The legal research consumed her evenings with the intensity of a scholar pursuing an advanced degree. She studied precedent cases involving corporate fraud, seeking examples of courts that had pierced the corporate veil to recognize the true creators of business value. Constructive trust theory offered particularly promising avenues for recovering assets that had been improperly transferred through deceptive means. Her mother's insistence on legal education now revealed its prophetic wisdom. Contract interpretation, shareholder rights, fiduciary duty violations, concepts that had seemed abstract during her law school courses, now became practical tools for dismantling David's fraudulent claims. Every principle she had learned, every case study she had analyzed, every legal theory she had mastered combined into a comprehensive understanding of the battlefield she would soon enter. The downtown legal aid clinic occupied a modest building that seemed designed to discourage anyone seeking assistance, with harsh fluorescent lighting and plastic chairs that had seen better decades. Chiaka arrived carrying a briefcase filled with her most compelling evidence, prepared to seek limited guidance while maintaining her determination to handle the primary litigation personally. Attorney Margaret Chen reviewed Chiaka's materials with the weary expression of someone who had witnessed countless stories of betrayal and financial manipulation. Her eyes widened as she absorbed the quality of evidence, the sophistication of the documentation, the obvious intelligence behind the legal strategy already taking shape. "This is extraordinary work," Margaret observed, flipping through carefully organized exhibits that would do credit to any major law firm. "Your case against the validity of those transfer documents appears quite strong. The timing discrepancies alone raise serious questions about whether you received adequate independent counsel." "I want to represent herself," Chiaka announced, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had made irreversible decisions. "This battle requires personal investment that no hired attorney could match. I need to face him directly, mind against mind, to prove that the woman he betrayed is fully capable of defending herself." Margaret studied Chiaka's face with the assessing gaze of someone evaluating whether a client possessed the emotional stability for such a demanding undertaking. Self-representation in complex corporate litigation involves substantial risks. Your husband will certainly employ expensive attorneys who specialize in protecting wealthy clients from challenges to their assets. Then they'll discover what it means to face the architect of the empire they're trying to defend, Chiaka replied with cold satisfaction. "David may have stolen my company, but he never understood how I built it. His lawyers will be defending strategies they don't comprehend, fighting for assets they can't properly value, protecting a throne built on foundations they've never examined." The consultation concluded with Margaret providing guidance about filing procedures, court protocols, and strategic considerations for presenting complex evidence to judges who might not appreciate the technical intricacies of corporate fraud. But the primary work, developing legal arguments, organizing evidence, crafting the narrative that would demolish David's fabricated claims, remained Chiaka's personal responsibility. During their final conversation, Margaret offered one piece of advice that resonated with particular force. Complex cases are won through preparation, not dramatics. Judges respect litigants who demonstrate mastery of both law and facts. Present your evidence systematically, argue your legal theories clearly, and trust that truth will prevail when properly presented. Chiaka left the legal aid clinic with renewed confidence in her chosen strategy. David expected her to stumble through proceedings she couldn't understand, intimidated by legal complexities beyond her comprehension. Instead, he would face an opponent who understood every aspect of the case better than he did, who had created the empire he claimed to own, who possessed both the legal knowledge and strategic intelligence to expose his theft with devastating precision. Chapter 9, The War Begins. Justice arrives not with fanfare but with the quiet authority of truth finally given voice, and sometimes the most devastating battles are fought in rooms where whispers carry more weight than screams. The courthouse steps stretched before Chiaka like an ancient amphitheater where gladiators once prepared to fight for their lives, each granite block polished smooth by countless feet of those who had come seeking justice or fled from its harsh pronouncements. She paused at the bottom of the staircase, breathing deeply of the crisp morning air while adjusting the strap of her single leather briefcase, a modest vessel containing the ammunition that would either restore her stolen empire or confirm her complete destruction. Above her, the courthouse doors opened with theatrical timing to disgorge David and his legal army. 4 attorneys in identical charcoal suits flanked him like a presidential security detail, their expressions projecting the confident arrogance of those who had never doubted their ability to overwhelm any opposition through sheer financial superiority. David walked at the center of this formation, resplendent in a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, his demeanor radiating the supreme confidence of someone who believed victory had already been purchased. His transformation was complete. Gone was any trace of the uncertain young man who had once struggled with basic economics. In his place stood a figure of corporate authority, his posture straight, his smile practiced, his every movement calculated to project success and dominance. The diamond cufflinks catching morning sunlight, the Italian leather shoes that whispered wealth with every step, the perfectly styled hair that spoke of expensive grooming, everything about him screamed power and privilege. The contrast could not have been more striking. David descended the courthouse steps, surrounded by his expensive entourage, briefcases and document boxes carried by junior associates who had probably graduated from the most prestigious law schools money could access. Behind him trailed additional support staff, paralegals, researchers, investigators, a small corporation dedicated to ensuring his legal triumph. Chiaka climbed those same steps alone, her solitary figure moving with the deliberate grace of someone who carried no burden except the weight of truth. Her black suit was elegant but modest, purchased from her carefully managed resources rather than unlimited wealth. Her briefcase contained no team of researchers' work, no investigators' reports, no hired expertise, only the evidence she had gathered with her own hands and the legal arguments she had crafted with her own brilliant mind. The courthouse lobby buzzed with the energy of dozens of legal battles about to commence. Lawyers clustered in expensive groups, their conversations punctuated by the rustle of important papers and the click of high-heeled ambition across marble floors. In this temple of justice, money spoke the loudest language, and David's entourage commanded immediate attention and respect. Judge Patricia Hartwell noticed the disparity immediately upon entering her courtroom. Her experienced eyes swept across David's legal battalion, taking inventory of the expensive suits, the multiple briefcases, the air of purchased competence that surrounded the plaintiff's table. Then her gaze moved to the defendant's table, where Chiaka sat with quiet dignity, her single briefcase opened to reveal neatly organized documents, her legal pad filled with handwritten notes, her posture reflecting calm determination rather than intimidated surrender. The gallery filled with spectators drawn by whispers of a David versus Goliath battle, though most assumed the wealthy businessman would easily crush his abandoned wife. Business reporters occupied the front row, anticipating a routine divorce proceeding that would provide minor entertainment before more important cases commenced. "Interesting," Judge Hartwell murmured to her clerk, though her words carried clearly across the suddenly silent courtroom. "We don't often see such asymmetric representation in cases involving substantial assets." David's lead attorney, Harrison Mitchell, the same lawyer who had helped orchestrate Chiaka's original downfall, rose to deliver his opening statement with the polished confidence of someone addressing an already decided case. His presentation painted David as a brilliant entrepreneur whose visionary leadership had transformed a small startup into a multi-million-dollar empire, whose business acumen had created prosperity that his ungrateful wife now sought to steal through frivolous litigation. Mitchell's voice carried the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to addressing juries of lesser intellects. His gestures theatrical, his tone suggesting that opposition to his client's claims bordered on the absurd. "My client built this company through years of tireless effort and innovative thinking," Mitchell declared, gesturing toward David with obvious admiration. "The defendant's claims represent nothing more than an attempt to profit from success she did not create and does not deserve." He painted a picture of Chiaka as a pampered housewife who had contributed nothing of substance to their business empire, someone now grasping desperately for assets she had never earned. His characterization was masterful in its cruelty, designed to diminish her achievements while elevating David to heroic status. When Mitchell concluded his theatrical performance and resumed his seat, the courtroom fell silent except for the gentle hum of air conditioning and the subtle rustle of expensive fabrics. All eyes turned to the defendant's table, where Chiaka rose with the fluid grace of someone stepping onto a stage she had been preparing for her entire life. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying across the courtroom with crystalline clarity, "opposing counsel has just presented a fascinating work of fiction. Unfortunately for his client, this courtroom deals in facts rather than fairy tales." She moved toward the evidence table with purposeful steps, her demeanor projecting none of the uncertainty David had expected from his abandoned wife facing overwhelming legal opposition. Every movement was calculated, every word precisely chosen, every gesture designed for maximum impact. The spectators leaned forward, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Perhaps Mr. Smith would like to explain how someone allegedly lacking business acumen managed to create the original pitch deck that launched our company. Chiaka lifted a document from her briefcase, holding it high enough for everyone in the courtroom to observe. The original pitch deck, enlarged and professionally mounted, showed her distinctive handwriting covering every page. Exhibit A, the Henderson manufacturing presentation, written entirely in my handwriting, containing calculations performed in my hand, signed with my signature. Mr. Smith's name appears nowhere on this foundational document. David's confident expression flickered momentarily, the first crack appearing in his carefully constructed facade. He leaned toward Mitchell, whispering urgently while gesturing toward the evidence Chiaka had just presented. His legal team huddled in consultation, clearly unprepared for such direct assault on their narrative. Perhaps he'd like to explain how someone without strategic vision managed to develop the algorithms that became our competitive advantage, Chiaka continued, placing another document on the evidence table. Exhibit B, the original code architecture, designed by my hand, documented with my notes, implementing solutions I developed to problems he couldn't understand. The courtroom atmosphere shifted perceptibly as Chiaka systematically demolished David's fabricated narrative. Each exhibit she presented revealed another layer of his deception. Each document she displayed contained irrefutable proof of her foundational role in creating the empire he now claimed as his own achievement. Reporters began scribbling furiously, recognizing that this routine divorce proceeding had transformed into something far more dramatic. The story was writing itself. Brilliant woman exposes husband's fraud in devastating courtroom confrontation. "Your Honor," she said, turning to address Judge Hartwell directly, "Mr. Smith has asked this court to believe that the woman he now describes as a housewife somehow managed to secure their first major client, negotiate their initial contracts, and solve the technical challenges that nearly destroyed their early operations. Does that narrative seem logical to you?" Judge Hartwell leaned forward in her chair, studying the evidence with obvious interest. Her reputation for cutting through legal nonsense to reach truth was well established, and the documents before her spoke far more eloquently than expensive attorneys ever could. "Please continue, Mrs. Smith. I find your presentation quite illuminating." David's face had progressed from confident to concerned to something approaching panic. He whispered more urgently to Mitchell, his gestures becoming increasingly agitated as Chiaka continued presenting evidence that exposed every aspect of his fraudulent claims. The supreme confidence that had carried him into the courtroom was evaporating like morning mist before the sun of truth. "Housewife," Chiaka repeated David's previous characterization with devastating scorn. "Your Honor, I present Exhibit C, wire transfers from my personal account that funded our company's initial operations. Every dollar that launched Mr. Smith's alleged empire came from my savings, my labor, my financial sacrifices." She moved closer to David's table, her eyes boring into his with laser intensity. The woman who had once knelt beside his chair begging for love had transformed into an avenging angel, magnificent in her righteous fury. "Everything you know about business, you learned from me. Every strategy you've ever implemented originated from my mind. Every success you've claimed was built on foundations I designed. You were my student, David, my apprentice, my shadow." The courtroom erupted in murmurs as spectators absorbed the implications of Chiaka's accusations. Mitchell rose to object, but Judge Hartwell silenced him with a raised hand, clearly captivated by the unfolding drama. This was why she had become a judge, to witness truth emerge from the muck of deception and greed. Chiaka called her first witness, Christopher Reynolds, the software developer who had worked with them from the beginning. His testimony confirmed that all strategic decisions had come from Chiaka, that David had served essentially as a messenger delivering her innovations to clients and investors. "Mrs. Smith designed every aspect of our technical architecture," Christopher testified under oath, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "She would sketch solutions on whiteboards during our morning meetings, then spend afternoons coding the implementations herself. Mr. Smith's role was primarily administrative, handling paperwork after she made the substantial decisions." Under Chiaka's skilled questioning, Christopher revealed damaging details about David's limited technical understanding. "He would ask me to explain Mrs. Smith's innovations so he could present them to clients. He called it translating genius into language ordinary people could understand, but we all knew he was learning the concepts for the first time during those briefings." Michael Johnson, their former operations manager, provided similar testimony, describing Chiaka as the driving force behind their quality assurance protocols, their client relationship strategies, their expansion into new markets. Each witness painted the same picture: David as a charismatic figurehead implementing decisions made by the true architect of their success. Mrs. Smith would arrive at 6 every morning and often stay past midnight, Michael testified. She was there for every critical decision, every client crisis, every strategic pivot. Mr. Smith generally arrived around 10 and left by 5, unless there was a social function that required his presence. But the most devastating evidence emerged during Chiaka's cross-examination of David himself. Under her relentless questioning, cracks appeared in his carefully rehearsed narrative. He couldn't explain technical details about products he allegedly designed, couldn't recall specific client negotiations he supposedly conducted, couldn't provide coherent answers about strategic decisions he claimed to have made. "Tell us about the algorithm optimization that saved the Morrison account," Chiaka demanded, referring to a critical technical solution that had prevented their biggest client from canceling their contract. "Walk us through your thought process in developing that solution." David stammered, his eyes darting toward his legal team for assistance that wouldn't come. The confident CEO, who had dominated business meetings, found himself trapped by his own fraudulent claims. The technical details aren't really relevant to..." "The technical details aren't relevant?" Chiaka's voice cut through his evasion like a blade. "You're claiming credit for saving a $10 million client relationship, but you can't explain how the solution actually worked." She produced emails showing her developing the solution, testing multiple approaches, working through the night to implement the fix that saved their biggest contract. David's name appeared nowhere in the technical discussions, though he had gladly accepted credit when the client praised their innovative response. Judge Hartwell watched this exchange with obvious fascination, her experienced eyes recognizing the difference between genuine knowledge and elaborate deception. The courtroom had fallen completely silent, spectators mesmerized by the surgical precision of Chiaka's demolition of David's credibility. The courtroom gasped audibly when Chiaka presented her final piece of evidence: corporate email records showing David transferring company funds to Misha Hancock's personal accounts, ostensibly for marketing services that had never been rendered. Bank statements revealed expensive dinners, luxury hotel charges, jewelry purchases, all funded with money from the business Chiaka had built. "Your Honor," she announced with quiet satisfaction, "these records show Mr. Smith systematically looting the company to fund his extramarital relationship, using assets he fraudulently claimed as his personal property." The revelation sent shockwaves through the gallery. Reporters scribbled frantically while spectators whispered among themselves about the dramatic turn in proceedings. David's face had gone completely white, his expensive suit now seeming like costume jewelry, gaudy and false. Judge Hartwell's expression had evolved from professional interest to obvious displeasure as she studied the financial evidence spread before her. The pattern was clear: a man stealing from the woman who had created his wealth to finance his betrayal of their marriage. David's legal team huddled in frantic consultation while their client's face drained of color. The expensive attorneys who had entered the courthouse expecting easy victory now found themselves defending the indefensible, their carefully constructed case crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. The tension in the courtroom reached unbearable levels as everyone waited for the judge's response to this cascade of devastating revelations. David's arrogant confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by the desperate panic of someone watching his carefully constructed lies crumble into dust. Chiaka stood at the center of this legal storm, her evidence having transformed her from discarded wife into avenging angel, her brilliant mind having turned David's own weapons against him with devastating effectiveness. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, victory and justice hanging in the balance while truth and deception engaged in their final decisive battle. Chapter 10. Victory and New Dawn. Truth spoken with quiet authority carries more power than all the purchased eloquence in the world, and justice delivered with precision cuts deeper than any sword forged from rage. Judge Hartwell's chambers fell silent as she reviewed the evidence one final time, her experienced fingers moving through exhibits that told a story of betrayal so calculated, so comprehensive, that it seemed lifted from the pages of classical tragedy. The financial records, the email correspondences, the witness testimonies, each piece of evidence formed part of a mosaic that revealed the true architect of the empire David had claimed as his own creation. When she returned to the courtroom, her expression carried the grave authority of someone prepared to render judgment that would reshape lives with the finality of carved stone. The spectators who had gathered to witness this legal drama leaned forward in anticipation, sensing that history was about to unfold before their eyes. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, Judge Hartwell began, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom with crystalline clarity. This court finds that the share transfer agreement executed between the plaintiff and defendant was obtained through undue influence, lack of independent legal counsel, and fraudulent misrepresentation of the document's true purpose and effect. David's face drained of color as the implications of her words settled over him like a shroud. His expensive legal team exchanged glances of barely concealed panic, recognizing that their client's carefully constructed case had collapsed entirely under the weight of truth. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that Mrs. Chiaka Smith served as the intellectual architect, strategic visionary, and primary creator of the business empire in question. The judge continued, her gaze moving between the opposing parties with judicial precision. Her contributions were not merely supportive or administrative, but foundational to every aspect of the company's development and success. She lifted the original pitch deck that Chiaka had presented as evidence, studying the handwritten calculations and strategic insights that had launched their empire. Mr. David Smith's role, while not insignificant, was primarily that of an implementing agent rather than an originating architect. The court finds that his current claims of exclusive ownership represent an attempt to appropriate credit and assets that rightfully belong to the true creator of their shared enterprise. Chiaka sat perfectly still, her hands folded calmly in her lap as vindication washed over her like warm sunlight after a bitter winter. Every sleepless night spent organizing evidence, every moment of doubt overcome by determined research, every tear shed over David's betrayal had led to this singular moment of triumph. Furthermore, Judge Hartwell continued, her voice taking on an edge of obvious displeasure, the court finds the financial records indicating misappropriation of company funds for personal expenses related to extramarital activities to be particularly troubling. Such behavior demonstrates a pattern of dishonesty that undermines any claim to moral or legal authority over the disputed assets. The courtroom erupted in hushed murmurs as spectators absorbed the full implications of the judge's findings. David's reputation, his social standing, his carefully cultivated image as a successful entrepreneur, all of it crumbling in real time under the weight of judicial pronouncement. The court hereby orders the following remedies, Judge Hartwell announced, her words carrying the force of legal commandment. First, the share transfer agreement is declared null and void due to the circumstances under which it was obtained. Second, Mrs. Chiaka Smith is hereby recognized as co-founder and equal owner of the business enterprise, entitled to full restoration of her rightful ownership stake. David's head dropped into his hands as his legal team sat in stunned silence, their expensive strategies rendered worthless by the devastating effectiveness of truth presented with brilliant precision. Third, the marital residence shall remain under joint ownership as originally established, with both parties retaining equal interest in the property. Fourth, Mr. David Smith shall bear full responsibility for all court costs and legal expenses incurred in this proceeding, given that this litigation was necessitated entirely by his fraudulent attempts to appropriate assets belonging to his wife. Judge Hartwell closed the case file with decisive finality. This court has rarely witnessed such a clear example of intellectual property theft disguised as marital partnership. Mrs. Smith, Your presentation of evidence and legal arguments was exemplary. You have successfully defended not only your financial interests, but your rightful place in business history." As the courtroom began to clear, David sat frozen at his table, surrounded by his expensive legal team, but utterly alone in his defeat. The confident CEO who had entered the courtroom expecting easy victory had been reduced to exposed fraud, his stolen throne toppled by the very woman he had betrayed and underestimated. Chiaka gathered her materials with unhurried dignity, placing each document back into her briefcase with the same methodical precision she had once used to build their empire. She felt no triumph in David's destruction, no joy in his humiliation, only the quiet satisfaction of justice properly served and truth finally acknowledged. As she walked toward the courtroom exit, David's voice called out behind her, cracked with desperation and what might have been genuine remorse. "Chiaka, please. Can we talk about this? Can we find some way to—" She paused without turning around, her voice carrying clearly across the now empty courtroom. "You stole my love, David. You betrayed my trust, violated our partnership, and tried to erase my contributions from history. But you couldn't steal my legacy because you never understood what created it." She turned to face him one final time, her expression serene with the peace that comes from battles fought with honor and won through intelligence rather than malice. "My story belongs to me again. My achievements bear my name. My empire stands on foundations I built with my own hands and my own brilliant mind." With those words, Chiaka Washington Smith walked out of the courthouse and into a future that belonged entirely to her, free from the chains of betrayal, proud in her vindication, undefeated by the man who had tried to steal her life's work, but had only succeeded in revealing the indomitable strength of a woman who refused to be erased from her own story.